How's it going, everyone? Graham here for Variety Show, and today I thought I'd do a video on something that I'm really pretty passionate about and something that I've loved collecting over the years, and that is vintage band tees. So I have quite a few of my favorites that I've just lined up, and over the years since I've been collecting them, I've developed my own sort of criteria or certain guidelines that I go about when searching for vintage band tees, both online and in store. So I thought I'd share with you a little bit of that knowledge that I've sort of acquired over the years and just go over that knowledge that I've accumulated while also showing you some of my personal favorite tees in the collection that I've ended up acquiring over the past few years, I'd say. I've really started ramping up choosing to buy vintage band t-shirts and vintage clothing in general over the past few years, and so my collection has really grown substantially since then. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Okay, so the first thing that I end up usually looking for or looking at... Lucille, stop! Go hang out with Mike Scotty. Alright, so probably the first thing that I end up looking at when it comes to assessing vintage t-shirts is the fade or the color of the shirt. So the reason I say both fade and color is there are mostly, when you look at vintage t-shirts, they end up being black. So what you want to look for there is if it's like the desirable fade that you want. So for example, this Deftones Around the Fur t-shirt, printed on a giant size large, has this really nice fade where it's not exactly like a gray, but it still has a fairly good amount of black dye still left into it after all the washing. Has some nice fuzzing all around and feels very soft to the touch. It's very well broken in. So this is the type of fade that I typically look for when it comes to black vintage t-shirts. But also it's really nice to incorporate a lot of colorful vintage t-shirts into your wardrobe if the opportunity presents itself. So just as an example, I have this Gorillaz vintage t-shirt printed on Screen Stars. This is from their original debut album from 2001. So it just creates this nice pop of color in your outfits, and you don't typically see colorful vintage band t-shirts as often as black ones. So when you see these ones available of a band that you really like, it's a great opportunity to pick it up and add some more color into your wardrobe, which is especially good during the summer months. And yeah, so that's pretty much the first thing that I end up looking for when it comes to vintage t-shirts. Of course, all of this is completely irrelevant if the measurements don't end up working out for you. So as far as me personally, I have vintage t-shirts that range either from a size medium to a size double extra large, depending on the type of fit that I want to go for. With vintage t-shirts, I like to have a huge array and different variety of fits of t-shirts so that I can have the right t-shirt available for like any sort of outfit that I want to make. So yeah, as far as measurements go, you really want to, if you're not able to try things on in store, if you don't have this sort of vintage curated boutique in your neighborhood or in your city, I really recommend asking for measurements on whatever platform you're looking for vintage t-shirts, if they're not already in the description of the listing itself. Because as we all know, certain sizes can fit differently, especially when it comes to vintage. Things stretch out, things shrink over time. So even though it may say that the item in question that you're looking at is a size large, it might end up even fitting like a size medium or a size extra large. It really depends. So you really need to be looking at those measurements. And I really like to have a wide variety of fits within my t-shirts. So even within this sort of section itself, this one right here, this is actually a perfect example. This is a vintage helmet t-shirt. I showed you guys this in the last video when I was styling sweaters. And this, just because of how unique this t-shirt is itself, I thought I'd give you guys a closer look. So it's printed on a Nice Man size extra large. I don't know if you can see that, and what ended up happening is a previous owner of this shirt ended up altering it. So you can see that the sides now have seams, which is not typical of vintage t-shirts. So this was an extra large and now fits more like a true medium, except the neck of the t-shirt still has the width of a extra large nice man shirt. So it's a very peculiar t-shirt, has little specks of purple and like bleach stains or whatnot throughout as well. But regardless, it's a very cool t-shirt and furthers my conclusion that you should really be looking at measurements or asking for measurements from sellers when you're interested in purchasing any sort of vintage garment or piece of clothing online. So the next thing that I usually end up looking for when it comes to vintage t-shirts is long sleeves versus short sleeves. So a lot of the vintage t-shirts that you'll end up finding do end up being short sleeves. So as you can see here, many of the ones that I have laid out on this rack here are short sleeves, but a few of them are long sleeves, and I have one sweatshirt and one hoodie that I have here as well to show you guys. The interesting thing about long sleeves is, once again, check the measurements. The measurements are always really weird, and there's a lot of differences and idiosyncrasies with long sleeves, even within the same brands and manufacturers of the blanks, whereas meaning that some of them are ribbed at the sleeves and some of them aren't ribbed. Some of them are longer, some of them have longer sleeves, some of them have wider necks. So it's really important to pay attention to the listings just to see if that long sleeve ends up being right for you. Because the long sleeve vintage t-shirt is a really great look, and a lot of my favorite vintage tees are long sleeves themselves. But it's important to know what exactly you're buying so that you're not surprised when it arrives at your door and you open it up and it wasn't exactly what you were expecting. So just to illustrate this example, I have this Meshuggah long sleeve t-shirt from one of their European tours. As you can see, it has the back print on the back as well, and the Meshuggah logo on the front. But this is supposedly a Screen Stars extra large, but it ends up fitting more so like a large to a medium, probably a large in the body, but a medium in terms of length and the sleeve length. It ends up hitting just above my wrist on this as far as the sleeves go, but they are still quite wide and the body is still quite wide. And the body is also fairly short in terms of length as far as long sleeves go, from my experience. Compare that to this extra large Napalm Death long sleeve, which is printed on a liquid blue. This one is miles different than the Meshuggah long sleeve. First and foremost, as you can see, this long sleeve is way more distressed, way more destroyed than the Meshuggah one. Has holes throughout on both sleeves. The collar of the shirt as well is totally ripped, and it has some holes in the back as well with where the Napalm Death logo is. So yeah, these are two extra larges, just emphasizing the differences in measurements, as well as these sleeves are also ribbed as opposed to the Meshuggah one where the sleeves are not ribbed. So yeah, just pay attention to the exact style you're getting with the long sleeves, as well as pay attention to any sort of distressings if that's what you're looking for, and also the measurements, and make sure that it lines up with your body type. And lastly, I just wanted to go over some hoodies and sweatshirts, just a general guide as far as those go. So from my experience, hoodies, as far as vintage hoodies have gone, are pretty good. I would say they're definitely better than the Gildan that you would see on merch websites, like I said before. But from my experience, from both sweatshirts and hoodies, you do experience a lot of pilling, and they do end up fitting typically smaller than what the tag says. So with vintage t-shirts, sometimes they end up fitting larger just because of the stretching, but because of them being washed and dried so many times, these hoodies and sweatshirts, they do end up fitting, from my experience, considerably smaller. So this one is a vintage corn hoodie. Excuse me for all the cat hair on it, but our cat has been sleeping on it sometimes. And it is a Screen Stars extra large. I don't know if you can see that, but this ends up fitting more like a medium to a large. So it's still fairly wide in the body, but not as wide as a modern extra large, as well as the sleeves are quite short, and the body, I would say, is fairly regular. But yeah, what you experience on these hoodies and sweatshirts is just a lot of pilling overall, and just a slightly more shrunken fit than what you would experience with modern hoodies and crew necks. Going towards this vintage Napalm Death crew neck as well. This one is in a really cool, unique green colorway. This one also is quite shrunken. This one is printed on, once again, a Screen Stars extra large, but I would say, and also based on the on-body shots that you're going to see, this one does fit, I would say, about between a medium and a large. What's also really nice about vintage sweatshirts and hoodies is that typically you can find a lot of them that are raglan sleeve, which creates a little bit of a more unique fit, something you don't see every day. And I think it falls really nice on body compared to just standard sleeves. And it's a nice distinction, as well as you find these really cool, unique colors, like this green right here, which I haven't really seen from a sweatshirt from any just general band merch these days. But yeah, vintage sweatshirts and hoodies are also a great way to go. Just make sure, once again, that you know exactly what you're getting into, and you know that the intended fit, based on my experience, is a little bit smaller, and once again, always refer to those measurements as well. So now that we've talked about the different sort of characteristics of vintage tees that you should be looking out for, I'm going to briefly talk about where you can acquire vintage t-shirts. So there are a few ways you can acquire them, either through thrifting yourself, going through online auctions. I found you can go to curated shops, both online or in store. So those are the three methods that I've used over the years. So thrifting has found myself the least amount of results, but I have found a few good vintage pieces while going out thrifting to value villages and things, places of that sort. But typically I end up finding a lot of the vintage pieces that I like on online auctions. So typically, if you can find some pieces or of some bands that not very many people desire, but you still really enjoy, you can find some really good vintage pieces there for affordable prices. For example, I am a huge fan of Meshuggah, as you could probably tell by a lot of my band t-shirts and the long sleeve that I just showed you guys. And those ones don't typically go for much, or at least they didn't. So I found a bunch of Meshuggah vintage t-shirts, each at about like 50 Canadian each, something along those lines on average, which isn't too bad considering the recent boom in the vintage marketplace. And yeah, there's just all those like standard sort of stores that you can go to online, like Burned Out or Tea Jerker or places like that. And I'm sure in your city, wherever you live, there might be some vintage sort of either consignment stores or curated shops where you can go in store after all this lockdown craziness is over and really try on and get a feel for vintage clothes yourself. Alright, so hopefully that gave you a good idea of the types of things that I look for when purchasing vintage t-shirts, as well as showed you a little bit of our collection of vintage tees. I didn't want to show off all of them because that would A, be a really long video, and 2, I don't really like videos, especially in regards to clothes, that end up being too show-offy. I think it's a little bit pretentious and corny and lame. So I just wanted to show you guys some of my favorites and some of what I look for in vintage tees, and hopefully you got a good idea on how the fit of each one is based on all the on-body shots that we're going to provide. And yeah, that about does it. Be sure to like the video if you do enjoy this type of content, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more. We really do appreciate every single like and subscribe and view at Variety Show. We just surpassed 100 subscribers, which I know is quite a small number that you might think, but it really means a lot to both of us. So that about does it, and our social medias will be in the description down below if you want to give us a follow over there as well as our vintage store on Etsy, and our designer stuff that we have for sale over on Grailed will be down there as well. So thank you very much for watching this video, and we'll see you guys very soon. Take care.